For our top story this hour, we look at allegations of Chinese meddling in U.S. affairs. Vice President Mike Pence addressed the Hudson Institute this week and accused the government in Beijing of trying to influence the outcome of upcoming elections.
China has initiated an unprecedented effort to influence American public opinion, the 2018 elections, and the environment leading into the 2020 presidential elections. To put it bluntly, President Trump's leadership is working, and China wants a different American president.
Before we get into Pence's startling claims, a quick word on the Hudson Institute. The D.C.-based think tank was founded by military strategist and futurist Herman Kahn. While employed at the pro-war Rand Corporation, Kahn became well known for his theory that a nuclear war with the Soviet Union was actually winnable. His work made him one of the inspirations for the title character of Dr. Strangelove, director Stanley Kubrick's classic black satire of the Cold War. Kahn founded the Hudson Institute with fellow Rand employees in 1961. A statement on its website reads, quote, "America's unique and central role in the global system offers the best foundation for security, the defense of liberty, and assuring economic growth." Is it any surprise, then, that Pence chose this location to escalate Cold War-like rhetoric against China?
There can be no doubt. China is meddling in America's democracy. As President Trump said just last week, we have, in his words, found that China has been attempting to interfere in our upcoming midterm elections. Our intelligence community says that China is targeting U.S. state and local governments and officials to exploit any divisions between federal and local levels on policy. It's using wedge issues like trade tariffs to advance Beijing's political influence.
With Chinese meddling in question, we're joined in studio by Eugene Puryear, organizer with the Anti-War Answer Coalition. Eugene, Pence's comments came the same week Pew Research Center released a poll showing that global citizens have higher confidence in the leadership of Chinese President Xi Jinping than they do President Trump. Did that surprise you?
I mean, it didn't really surprise me at all. I mean, I think we've seen President Trump continue many of the most disastrous policies people around the world have seen, whether it's the long legacy of regime change, Iraq, Libya, whatever it may be, the continued ongoing war and occupation of Afghanistan, which has its 17th anniversary this upcoming Sunday, and the facilitation of the really almost genocidal war in Yemen taking place right now, which couldn't be happening without the role of the United States. So I think when you look around the world, certainly if you look at the sort of almost orgy of giveaways to corporate interest here in the United States, it makes perfect sense to me that whatever critique someone may or may not have of China, when you look at the reality of the United States, which is reckless, erratic, and extraordinarily violent, as well as trying to impose its will on the world, it makes sense that a ranking would turn out that way.
Why do you think people have confidence in Xi, though?
I think it's because of the rhetoric that China has put forward, which is very inclusive around the world. It's talking about empowering nations. It's talking about linking them together via trade, via cultural and social intercourse between the different nations. And so it really is a vision of China's role in the world that is at least presented as one of partnership, as opposed to the United States, which is presented as one as leadership, which I think ultimately people know means domination.
And one area where we see China's influence really expanding is Africa. The United States Africa Command Center, or AFRICOM, turned 10 this week. How does AFRICOM relate to U.S. attempts to counter China's influence in Africa?
I think the best way to look at AFRICOM is similar to how the Reagan administration approached Latin America in the 80s, which is to build up these military forces in countries that are certainly friendly to Western nations in order to prevent any sort of rival from coming along. So you've got 46 bases in 23 countries, active activities in 33 countries by AFRICOM. And it's, you know, on the one hand, an issue of the rise and the growing influence of China, but more specifically, it's in the context of what we're seeing a rise in progressive movements, progressive social movements, progressive governments even taking further turns to the left on important issues like land reform, and the possibility that relationships with countries like China and India can provide strategic leverage points for these nations to be able to improve the terms of trade even with the West. And even today, you have the U.S., UK, France dominate foreign direct investment into China, $220 billion, into Africa rather, $220 billion as opposed to $32 billion in China. So they see the possibility of China becoming not only a better partner, but forcing them to treat Africans better as Africans themselves start to take hold of their destiny. And I think we're seeing that through popular movements and governments around the continent.
And finally, Trump's national security strategy names China and Russia as the biggest threats to the United States. Is this all part of an attempt to escalate tensions with China, and where can it go?
I think it absolutely is an attempt to escalate tensions with China, and I think we've seen this from the now blanket racist statements by the FBI about all Chinese students, at least potentially being spies, that the United States is extraordinarily fearful of the possibility of China really eclipsing it. I mean, you have the issue over 5G, for instance, where there's a huge amount of attempt to hobble the Chinese technology industry to prevent China from really being a powerful country that can offer many of the things that the United States can offer to people around the world, but in perhaps terms of trade, terms of relationships that are much better. Where can it end up? Tough to know. I think obviously we don't want to just be saying World War III is around the corner, but I think the reality is when you have two major nuclear-powered countries, and when the U.S. strategy seems 100% aimed towards crippling China's ability to do what it says it wants to do, move to a middle-income, moderately prosperous country over the next 40 years, then it seems very difficult to talk about tensions not at least approaching the possibility of war, given the fact that the United States also is pursuing a very rapid Indo-Pacific militarization strategy designed at containing China's rise.
It seems like it would be an unwise move to risk that kind of war, but it's just getting really out of hand, the accusations flying towards China. We'll have to leave it there. Eugene Puryear, organizer with the Anti-War Answer Coalition, thanks a lot.
Thanks for having me.
Hey YouTube, thanks for checking out our channel. We hope you enjoyed the video. We have tons of content for you just like this. For more of RT America's one-of-a-kind news and analysis, be sure to subscribe and never stop questioning more.